very special welcome to the members of the Dakota Nation who are here with us this evening. Thank you for making the time to attend. We want to open the evening with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the Dakota people whose unceded territory includes Chinook-Powakpa Dakota Nation, located on the Oak Lake Reserve. We also recognize the Anishinaabe and Cree peoples as signatories to Treaty 2 and long-standing caretakers of this region. This area is part of the historic Northwest Métis homeland. This mic does not like me. We honor the generations who have cared for these lands, waters, and skies, and we commit to building relationships rooted in respect, listening, and responsibility. A quick housekeeping item before we begin. We are recording the presentation using microphones connected directly to the camera, sitting right there. So the audio should be clear in the video, and we'll post it on our website after the event so that anyone who couldn't attend tonight can watch it. And with that, we'll get started. So I want to take a moment to introduce our team from Deep Sky who is here tonight. We've brought a diverse skill set from across the company, and we're here to answer your questions directly and make sure you hear from the people that are doing the work day to day. I'll ask my team to stand when I say your name. So we have Jason Vanderhayden here. He's the VP of Government Affairs and Public Policy. We have Shawn Day, Director of Project Development and Community Partnerships. Leon Sutherland, Director of Design Engineering. Pierre-Olivier Vincent, Head of Capital Projects. Lance Morrison, Senior Development Engineer. And myself, I'm Kelsey Peterson, Manager of Capital Projects. So here's how tonight will run. First, we're going to walk through the Deep Sky presentation, give you a clear picture of the project and where things stand today. Then we're going to hear from our guest speakers. After that, we'll open the floor to a moderated Q&A, and you'll have the chance to ask questions and share what's on your mind. There's also a question box at the back of the room. If you're not comfortable speaking up in the crowd, please go write your question down, and we will answer it during the Q&A, or you can leave your email address and we can get back to you. Really, the goal of tonight is transparency, clarity, and real conversation. So I mentioned we have a couple of guest speakers with us tonight. These are independent experts who have spent their careers working in geology, subsurface science, and CO2 storage. First, we have Christa Williams. She is the Vice President of Business Development at Canadian Discovery and the President-elect of the Canadian Energy Geoscience Association. She'll be giving an overview of the geology in this region and the fundamentals of safe CO2 storage. We're also joined by Dr. Ben Rostron. Where's Ben? Oh, over here. Dr. Rostron is the president of Isobrine Solutions and an emeritus professor at the University of Alberta. He has decades of experience working on real CCS projects across North America. Tonight, he'll speak about the practical safety record and what long-term CO2 storage looks like. We invited Christa and Ben because they bring independent technical expertise and because we want you to hear directly from the people that have been doing this work for years. Before we get into the details of the project, we want to share a little bit about who Deep Sky is and the work we're already doing in Canada. Deep Sky is the world's first technology-agnostic carbon removal project developer. What that means is that we work with many different direct air capture technologies and build the projects that bring them to life. Our role is to develop the sites, secure the power, manage the permitting, and integrate the full system, from direct air capture of CO2 to long-term storage of those molecules. We already have a facility operating today. Earlier this year, we commissioned Deep Sky Alpha in Innisfail, Alberta, and it's capturing carbon from the atmosphere and helping us refine the design for future commercial projects, like the one we're discussing tonight. And with that, I will pass it over to Shawn.
Okay, thank you, Kelsey. Hope you can all hear me okay. So like Kelsey said, my name is Shawn, Director of Project Development and Community Partnerships at Deep Sky. I'm just happy to be here. So I'm going to run through the Deep Sky presentation before I hand it over to Christa. So as we know, CO2 itself isn't poisonous, but too much of it acts like a blanket around the Earth. And this blanket traps heat, it changes weather patterns, it makes storms stronger and our summers hotter, and winter's just less predictable. It contributes to a rise in wildfires and droughts, and those things have been prevalent not just across Manitoba over the last few years, but really across all of Western Canada. And this is why direct air capture is so important. It removes carbon from the air and helps maintain quality of life for everyone. Direct air capture is not the only thing that we should be doing. We should also be planting trees, we should be restoring wetlands, and developing other sustainable practices. However, these measures without direct air capture will not be enough. Direct air capture is the only tool we have to remove excess CO2 from the air, and that excess piece is key. The goal is not to remove all CO2 from the air. So I've heard that Manitobans are known for their socials, and you can kind of think about direct air capture like cleaning up after a big party. We can't just stop making a mess and say that's good. We need to tidy up what's already there to get back to the way that things were. Direct air capture is not an entirely new process. Canada's been doing carbon sequestration for over 20 years, and that's something that Dr. Ben Rostron is going to talk about. And this technology is really guided by that experience. So we absolutely support tree planting and natural climate solutions like restoring wetlands. But this is a good illustration of why direct air capture is needed as well. A compact facility like Deep Sky Alpha, our facility in Innisfail, can remove the same amount of CO2 as 140,000 trees. So shown here is just a comparison of the size of the facility in the top right. That's the actual layout of the facility. That's like a screenshot of Innisfail versus trees to the left. So direct air capture gives us a way to meaningfully scale carbon removal without needing huge land areas. Okay, here we see a great example of direct air capture in its physical form. So there's really three key steps. Number one, you pull CO2 through the air through large industrial fans. That then goes into a pressurized facility where we condense the CO2 into a liquid form, and that CO2 is taken and injected underground. Of these three steps, the processing and storing has been done in Canada for over 20 years. So you can really think of direct air capture kind of like how an AC works. Direct air capture works by moving that air through a filter that separates the CO2 from the air to clean it. CO2 is then piped to a processing facility that pressurizes it and liquefies it so it's ready for storage. From that processing facility, it goes to storage. And we've determined the best storage locations by geological mapping and modeling, first step on the left, then drill safely deep into the ground. The second picture is just what a standard wellhead looks like. These are the same wellheads that are used in the oil industry. And the third image is a facility in Iceland, just to show you that we don't necessarily leave the pipe exposed, but we cover it so it works to blend into the environment. And there's lots of different things that you can do at that stage. You can paint these facilities, you can have different layouts so they're more compact and those types of things, and we can really have public input on that kind of stuff so we can make sure that it blends in with the environment and works with your daily life. So now that we've shown you the above ground, let's just see a little bit more what those underground processes look like. And this is exactly what Dr. Rostron and what Christa are going to talk about, more about that subsurface piece. But for many years, large volumes of CO2 have been stored underground safely. This process includes drilling into a special layer called a deep saline storage formation. This water has a very high amount of salt and dissolved solids, and it can be not and it cannot be used for drinking water or really any other purpose at all. So we drill down between 1 to 2 kilometers. That blue line on the image on the left is just an illustration of where drinking water typically sits, which would be in like the tens of meters below the subsurface. There are literally hundreds of meters of earth between the water, the groundwater, and where the CO2 storage occurs. And these hundreds of meters of earth act like a seal to trap and store the CO2 safely. So I just do want to acknowledge and thank Sioux Valley Chief Jennifer Bone for joining us today. Through our declaration of relationship, they offer support to the project. So yeah, thanks Blake, and thank you Chief Jennifer Bone for being here. So just back to this slide. So we also drill a monitoring well so we can continuously validate the safety of the storage, and that's that image in the middle. So this is a dedicated well that monitors in real time, provides us with information on how that CO2 is acting in the subsurface, just to make sure that everything is being stored safely. We have a duty to annually report to both the regulator, and then as well as a company, we've made a commitment to do something called a community impact report, just to make sure that that information also gets out to the community. But that doesn't mean we just monitor once a year. There's a lot of monitoring that happens just continuously, so we're getting information in real time. Then on the right-hand side, this is a cross-section of a pipe as it's going through that upper groundwater level layer. So there's multiple layers of steel and cement, processes that are proven in both the oil and gas industry and the CCUS industry, just to make sure that there would never be a chance of infiltrating the groundwater with CO2. Okay, so at the beginning of this presentation, we did speak about the process for direct air capture. As many of you know, we have not selected a site yet, but this is a good visual of what that facility will look like. So in that image on the bottom, in the top left, those are the direct air capture units. The processing facility is where the Deep Sky logo is located, kind of in the bottom right, and that's about the same size as like a farm shop or a Quonset, and that's like the biggest thing on site. And then off to the left of where the Deep Sky logo is, that's that well with like the similar cover that I showed in a previous slide of what it looks like in Iceland. So this facility is designed to flow with the landscape, and again, like I said, those aspects of design will have public input in them. And as you can see, the facility is relatively small. There aren't large towers, or it isn't shown to have busy parking lots and those kinds of things. So just to kind of walk you through what that idealized timeline is. So the reason that a site hasn't formally been announced yet is because we're waiting on a couple things from the regulator, and those timelines are out of our control. So number one, there's a Carbon Capture and Storage Act. This act was introduced in 2024, but the government right now is developing regulations. So those regulations are kind of a playbook of how to interpret the act and use the act properly. And then we're also waiting for what's called a load interconnection feasibility study from Manitoba Hydro. So once we have both of those, site selection will occur. We're hoping that happens early Q1 2026. After the Carbon Capture Storage Act is in place, we'll move to drilling the carbon storage test well. And this is really a well, it's not going to be used as the injection well right away. It's really a well just to get subsurface data and understand more about the subsurface after we've done our modeling. We'll then begin site preparation and civil work. Once we have moved that information from the test well into our modeling, update our modeling, understand the subsurface even better, we convert that well to a full carbon storage test well, and then move through completing facility construction, commissioning, and operations in Q2 of 2027. So it's worth talking as well about the economics of carbon removal. So the credits from this facility come from what's called the voluntary market. This means that independent companies are buying these credits on their own accord. So the world's largest companies are putting money forward for Deep Sky to clean the CO2 from the air. So this means that companies like Coca-Cola, Apple, and Disney could potentially be putting millions of dollars to work in your community. None of this is connected in any way to the carbon tax. These companies are choosing to make these investments through net zero commitments. This is also not an excuse for companies to be polluting more. It's just some emissions from regular company operations cannot be removed. So this helps companies offset that. So one of the reasons we chose to do this in Manitoba is a positive policy landscape that exists. Deep Sky is not receiving any provincial or municipal dollars for this project. Provincial legislation through the Carbon Capture Storage Act enables Deep Sky to be eligible for what's called a federal investment tax credit. So the federal government introduced these investment tax credits to help businesses cover the cost of carbon removal technology and to encourage companies to invest in economic growth and new projects in communities like yours. The investment tax credits are not an upfront investment, and this is a huge difference from just government funding. But we are eligible for tax credits after we spend the money to encourage capital investment. This is not only for Deep Sky, it's also for all CCUS tech. And it's not in Manitoba, but for all jurisdictions where these regulations are in place. So the entire industry is already taking advantage of these tax credits in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. We just want to ensure that Manitoba can also leverage these tax credits. And it should also be worth acknowledging that these tax credits are only for capital, not for operations. So it's not going to be the government will not be subsidizing the operation forever. So now that we know why we've chosen Manitoba, let's get into specifically why this region is so special. So Southwest Manitoba has, what I already referred to as deep saline formations for carbon to be stored. There's literally tens of millions of CO2 storage potential in Southwest Manitoba. And Manitoba has the right type of underground geological formations to safely secure CO2 for the long term, and not just store it, but also secure it. Manitoba has an electricity grid that's over 99% powered by renewables and is home to a skilled workforce. Deep Sky Manitoba will bring an estimated $500 million investment into the region, and that's pretty huge. Deep Sky is also committed to community investment. I really want to highlight this piece. So we're establishing something called a community liaison group to help us with that, and also just to kind of help disseminate information about the project. So if this is something that you're interested in, come and talk with one of the Deep Sky representatives, and we'll give you more information about that. But something we hope to be moving forward with relatively quickly. So this project won't change the way your community looks, sounds, or smells. The facility is quiet, clean, and compact, so it won't impact daily life. You'll hardly notice it's there, but you'll see the benefits through jobs and economic growth. We are required to have a sound and traffic assessment as part of the permitting process. We also undertake a comprehensive environmental assessment to ensure there will be minimal effects to the animals, the air, the water, and soil. So again, I want to thank the Dakota Nation for being present and showing your support for this project. Earlier this year, we signed a declaration of relationship with the Dakota Grand Council and the Dakota Nations of Manitoba, which included the Chinoopa Dakota Nation. And this DOR, or Declaration of Relationship, is really anchored on three key pillars, which is economic partnership, energy, and knowledge translation. And it's really an agreement to develop a relationship and a commitment to communicate, just to ensure that there are opportunities for meaningful participation throughout the project. In addition, we have engaged early with municipal councils in Pipestone and Two Borders, meeting from the start and returning often to maintain dialogue. We'll be hosting at least 2 more information sessions as we work through the timeline from the earlier slides, which would likely be once the site is confirmed and again before construction begins. We do have our deepskyclimate.com/Manitoba website. On there you'll also find our email, manitoba@deepskyclimate.com. I'm typically the one that answers emails about just general project questions, and then it's typically Kelsey for people that offer land, jobs, and services for the project. And I would like to think that we answer those quickly, honestly, and transparently. We also do update our project FAQs, so if you got those handouts, that's the QR code on the back. It can also be reached that part of the website. So a lot of the questions that have been coming up, and if there's any that you think about, there's a good chance that it's already referenced in the FAQs. And we answer those in real time with the questions that we get. I also really do honestly want to thank the people who have reached out with support and offering services and their companies to support the project, the many who have submitted resumes, offered land. Just honestly, thank you. And even those who have written in for support and welcoming us into the community, that kind of stuff is really appreciated. And this is important as we're committed to keeping as many services as local as possible. And we're going to be starting to move into procurement soon. So you'll be hearing from people like Pio and Kelsey as we move into that stage of the project. All right, so thank you. That is my portion of the presentation, and I'm happy to hand it over to Christa Williams from CDL.
Thank you, Shawn, and wow, this is an amazing turnout. I'm really excited to take you guys through a different kind of a journey, and a little bit about me. My name is Christa Williams. I'm a geologist, so I'm the VP of Business Development at a company called Canadian Discovery, who has a long history in geoscience. It was founded in oil and gas exploration and development, but is carried across Canada and the globe in all kinds of different projects in carbon sequestration, critical minerals, geothermal, as well as continued oil and gas exploration and development. Once I figure out which mouse works, we'll Okay, there we go. Standard disclaimer on forward-looking statements. I am here to provide information and education and tell you guys a little bit about geology and what I know about the subsurface and how it relates to carbon sequestration. So Canadian Discovery has been around for almost 40 years now. We travel the globe, we do a lot of work in the subsurface, and really our core competency is geoscience, and it's understanding the subsurface and how fluids and gases and everything interact within the subsurface itself. We have clients worldwide. Our clients range from governments, non-for-profits, from industrial emitters like steel factories, cement factories, midstreamers, oil and gas companies, you name it. We have a wide variety of clients, and part of what we are doing with our clients is providing education and understanding of the subsurface and its importance and critical piece in carbon sequestration. Sorry, I'm a loud talker, so this mic's kind of providing some static. But we're going to start off with what CCS is, and I'm a little bit of a, it's going to be hard for me to stand still. I'll work on it. So why is CCS needed? CCS is a crucial technology whose rapid deployment at large scale will help the world meet its aggressive global climate goals. Geological storage of CO2 occurs naturally. Industry has been doing this for decades upon decades. Proper CO2 storage ensures that CO2 is stored for many millennia with low risk of reversal. This is something that the industry knows very well. But the first step in developing any CCS project is really understanding the subsurface. That's your number one stop. So the study itself is part of estimating CO2 storage potential and providing key information to industry, governments, non-for-profit groups, communities, and others to make informed decisions. The map on the left-hand side of the screen is showing you all the CCS projects throughout the globe. There's quite a few of them. And part of it is understanding what stage of development they're in. Some places are further along than others, and so it's making sure that you have assessed the geology appropriately so that you can understand what kind of storage potential that you have within your general area. One of my favorite statements is geology and geography matter. So it's not the same everywhere, it changes, and so you have to adapt to those changing conditions and make sure that you're assessing them appropriately. So I wanted to stop and talk about the global carbon cycle. Carbon is the backbone to everything on this earth. It's fundamental, and human activities have caused a change in the amount of carbon that we have within our system. So what you can see in the diagram here is a cyclic image showing we've got plants that are taking in the CO2, we've got water that is sinking in, we have CO2 that's stored within the water, we have animals and humans, we expel it when we breathe, We also have industrial activities that cause further CO2 emissions to occur. We have transportation, we have shipping, we have all of our beautiful lives that we love to support. And by all of these activities, there has been an imbalance in the CO2 that we have within the atmosphere. So what we need to do now is look at ways that we can actively help decarbonize that problem and help industries that are emitting more carbon, shipping, whether it's already occurred or whether it's still yet to come. This is a problem that we're going to need to have to address for decades to come. So part of this falls back on what Shawn had previously mentioned in terms of carbon management. So there's a range of approaches, and we need every single one of them. Carbon sequestration is not the answer, and we're not going to pull all the CO2 out of the air because we can't, and we need to have a certain amount of CO2 in the air. But we need to look at renewables, we need to look at electrification, we need to look at CCUS, we need to look at fuel searching and nature-based options, so trees, mangroves, making sure that we've got everybody at the table to help the whole globe solve these problems. It's not just one country and it's not just one locality, it's everywhere. And it's something that collectively we all need to come together to help support. So in terms of what CCUS is, I think this image does a really good example of showing you all the different components. My mouse doesn't work, but you can see that we have a facility at the top. This is an emitting facility. That is where typically you would have point source capture coming at the smokestack itself. To the bottom of the diagram, you can see the two squares that have the fans in them. That's direct air capture. That can be put anywhere. That is helping pull the carbon from the air itself, and it can be stored through transportation, but like what Deep Sky's operations are looking at doing, it can also be stored right directly at the site. And so that helps mitigate some of the process in the value chain. But in a lot of cases, depending on where you are, you may not have the ideal geology to help you emit those carbon problems. So you have to look at transporting it. Are you transporting it with pipe? Are you transporting it overseas? There's many projects that are currently occurring offshore. And how are you going to use it or store it? So you can use it in food, you can use it in enhanced oil recovery, you can use it in chemicals and polymers. There's all kinds of different uses that you have for it. But those uses will never meet the demand of what we need to do to decarbonize. So you need to look at storage and permanent storage. And so that's where geology comes in. And we get to go through and characterize the geology adequately to make sure that it's securely and safely stored there for millennia to come. So in terms of the geological storage and carbon dioxide removal model, as I've mentioned, we've got a number of different things that are at play. We've got enhanced ecosystem management, which is peatland, soil, ocean carbon. We've got biomass conversion and preservation, that's in the middle of the slide in the yellow. And then we have geochemical and geophysical on the far left of the slide. You can see in the picture it's depicting those activities. We've got trees, we've got oceans, we've got biomass conversions, and then we've got different operations that are occurring, whether it's direct air capture, point source capture, but also the readiness level of all of those things. And so that's what the bars on the bottom of the slide are showing you. When it comes to readiness level of being able to plant a tree tomorrow, we can absolutely go do that. Is the reversal risk high? Yes, because that tree can be removed. Somebody's going to come in, they're going to potentially put up a parking lot or a house or whatever it is. And so those are some of the parameters that you need to think of. But then when you go to a more permanent solution, this is for hundreds of millennia. This is long-term storage to deal with the carbon problem. And the reversal risk is very negligible. It's very unlikely that you're ever going to have a reversal risk. And this can be proven, and Dr. Ben Rostron is going to talk about some projects that are currently active today. The other thing that's really great about being able to geologically store CO2 is that we're able to leverage our industrial experience. So acid gas injection has been something that's been occurring in Western Canada for decades. We have been safely and securely storing CO2 as well as other harmful gases deep beneath the surface. But the other thing that's really interesting is CO2 is also a naturally occurring gas in the subsurface. It used to be drilled for back up in the 1900s for dry ice, as well as a refrigerant and CO2 gas for fire extinguishers and carbonated water. And so this was something that we tapped into a long time ago to use for our purpose. And the other component is that we have examples of CCS projects all across the globe. So we've got great examples in Weyburn, Quest, Norway, as well as in Western Australia. And so these are all working, functioning CO2 sequestering projects that have been in production for quite some time now. In terms of how CCS is being developed globally, we've got the top 5 countries with CCS projects. One thing to note is Canada is number 3. We're behind the United States and the United Kingdom, but we're number 11 in terms of the emitting countries. China, that's the big one, but the other big one is international shipping. It's not really a country, but it is an industry that is emitting a lot of CO2, and so it has a hard to abate carbon problem. And so that's part of why we all need to come together and make sure that we're driving forward the technologies to help us solve these solutions. So when it comes to storing geological storage, what I like about this slide is that it shows that as a gas, CO2 is a large volume. The reason that we compress it and we put it into what we call a supercritical state, so that's not quite a liquid, it's not quite a gas, but it's an emulsification. It decreases the density and the volume size of the molecule itself so that you can store larger volumes of it and transport it more easy underneath the ground. And so many places on Earth, this is around 800 meters. That does vary, again, geology and geography, but also on the temperature and the pressure that is relevant in the area. But this is part of why we look at taking CO2 from a supercritical state to storing it deep within the subsurface. Next, one other thing that's really important to note about CO2 storage is scale. This picture here depicts geological storage about 1 kilometer below the surface. So you can see in the top where we have a CCS processing plant. Up here on the surface, we have lakes. Then we have idealized wellbore that goes down to about 1 kilometer below the surface at a storage site. You can see what the rock looks like right at that storage site itself. To give you an idea of how deep below the surface of the peat this actually is. Now again, to put this into a reference point, the largest man-made building that we have in the world is 1,000 meters high. And so that's approximately the depth that we're looking at in terms of being able to store CO2. Now when you're evaluating a CO2 storage target, you need to take into consideration a lot of parameters. You need to understand the reservoirs of the seals. The seals help you ensure your containment. You need to estimate your reservoir thickness and your porosity. If you haven't heard what porosity is the pore space that you have within the grains in your rock, and that's what can adequately store your liquid, your gas, and then your permeability is the ability for that fluid to move through it. You need to understand the density, the phase, the pressure, but you also need to understand what the subsurface looks like below your feet. There's been a lot of movement and change over the millions and millions of years that the Earth has been around. Billions of years the Earth has been around. And make sure that you understand all those different components, but ultimately also how the fluids are going to move and interact within the subsurface. So now we'll talk about trapping mechanisms. So when I was talking about the structure beneath the subsurface, you've got hills and valleys. Think of it like you're walking on the surface today. You can have structural trapping that occurs within that. Next, you'll have residual trapping. So when you have a sponge and you take that sponge and you squeeze that sponge, you're still going to have a little bit of water that's left in that sponge that's going to have to dry out. And so that residual trapping is still a component that is going to happen with your CO2. Next, you're going to have solubility trapping. The best example of this is carbonated drinks. Carbonated water, Coke, pop, ginger ale, you name it. And that's for tens to thousands of years. After that, you're going to have mineral trapping. And so this occurs at the pore level. Some of this occurs at the reservoir level, some of this occurs at the pore level, but all of this is necessary in order for the trapping to occur with CO2. I do have to note that these slides are courteous of a good colleague of mine, David Hills at Entropy, and I think they do a really good job of helping to showcase what's actually occurring within the subsurface and the pore space. The next slide I'm going to go through is an example from Western Canada. This is just west of Calgary, near the town of Cochrane. And this is a project that Entropy had actively been working on, CDL had looked at, and it does a good job of taking you through a journey in the subsurface. So I'm going to click through here, and we're going to go through the subsurface. One thing to note is where the water wells are. They don't go deeper than 200 meters. So we're well away from the water wells. We're also well away from the basic groundwater protection. Now again, that's going to change geographically depending on where you are, but you're going to step down. You're going to go through a number of different rock layers. You're going to evaluate what those rock layers are if you actually have pore space, then also if you've got containment. Do you have seals for that? Scale is very important. This, in this case, this is not here in Manitoba, but this is just west of Calgary. In this case, this is about the size of the Eiffel Tower. So these are huge when you think about putting that into to an understanding of where we're walking around today. So when we go through and we assess all of the geological parameters of what makes a good storage reservoir, we need to have the thickness, we need to have the porosity, the permeability. We go through all of the tools, the wells, the data that we have access to. We take this down to the pore level. And so we take thin sections of the rock and we look at the pore space and we understand how the grains have come together and how the fluids are going to interact within that pore space itself. So really we leave no rock unturned. Now when this relates to what's going on here in southwestern Manitoba, you can see a schematic there on the left-hand side of the screen showing the dipping layers of the northern part of the Wilson Basin. And there are 3 specific units that have been looked at for characterization for storage. And so you can see a stratigraphic column there on the right-hand side. We have indicated about 1 kilometer down to 1.7 kilometers below the subsurface. And there's a number of reservoir seal pairs showing you that you've got the reservoir would be the permeable porous rock, that you have the right conditions to store, and then you've got your appropriate seal above it. And I think this does a really good job to show that even at 1 kilometer below the subsurface, you've got reservoir seal pairs, and then even above that, you've got continued seals that are going all the way up to the surface. The next piece that's going to lead nicely into Ben's talk here is how containment is ensured. So do you have all the right conditions for the storage unit itself? Can you have that container? Can you put the lid on it and know that it's not going to leak? And we have decades of research going through and helping us understand those reservoirs and seals, but protecting the groundwater, proper monitoring and measurement and verification plan, mitigating the risk of any legacy wellbores, and making sure that we have addressed all of the primary concerns, both pre, during, and post-injection, so that all things can be monitored and measured accordingly. So with that, that's the end of my story, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben.
Wow, that's amazing turnout, and I must say that pretty intimidating to be standing up here in front of all of you. So first of all, I'll say thank you all for taking some time out of your evening to listen to what I have to say. And they asked me, Deep Sky asked me to come here and share some thoughts with you about my experience doing this. This must be at least my 12th or 15th public meeting like this, so I've had a fair bit of experience talking to people. So they asked me to give some insights, and I'll just say that's a picture of me then doing an annual groundwater survey with one of my employees, Lucas, and we're measuring groundwater quality near the SaskPower's coal-fired power station. And then there's some cartoons, and I'll explain what these cartoons mean on 2 of the that are recognized among the largest carbon storage projects in the world. How do I do this? Oh, I see over there. Oh my God. All right, so the first thing I want to say to everyone here, right, is you hear lots of stuff on Facebook and media and people trying to raise a level of fear, talking about a conversation about CO2. And we have nothing to fear from CO2. Okay, CO2s are all around us. And this is a natural part of plants and the land where photosynthesis drives plants to grow. And plants are cycling CO2 from the atmosphere to grow. And and then into the soil. And the soil has organic matter that decays, and soil actually respires CO2 back into the atmosphere. Okay, this happens all the time, everywhere you go. And we measure it. So there's a picture of us actually with a little ring and a little hemispherical dome. And we put that on the ground and we measure the amount of CO2 coming out. And we record this in some places 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year round for years. And so a technical number, right? 2 to 10 micromoles per meter squared per second. And you go, holy crap, what does that mean? Well, that's a typical prairie soil, averaged over a year, whatever. Now in the wintertime it's frozen, so not a lot comes out. In the spring, when things are actively growing, more comes out. If it's warmer, if it's wetter, you all know more than I do about that. But I tried to put some numbers on, okay, let's put that in something we can get our heads around. And I understand, the idea of the Grey Cup and that the Riders won. But typical CFL football field, 2 to 10 micromoles per meter squared per second. That works out to be about 60 to 300 kilograms per day, okay, of CO2. So when you hear people talking about thousands of tons per year being stored or injected underground, remember that sort of tens to hundreds of kilograms of CO2 are moving all the time, every day, all around the world. So it's not something to be afraid of, okay? Now, another takeaway from this presentation is you've heard a few times about how we've been doing this on an industrial scale. So we define a CCS project as a project that takes CO2 from an anthropogenic source, not not oil companies using CO2 from the ground to get more oil, but actually stuff that's being vented and put underground. And it also has to be monitored. Well, Canada is home to 5 CO2 projects in the world, and Weyburn Midale is the second project in the world, and it's among the largest in the world right now. So since 2000, they've stored about 50 million tons of CO2, and that's just near Weyburn, Saskatchewan, right? I've labeled it WM there. The Aquastore project started in 2013, and we've put away 623,000 tons as part of the Boundary Dam coal-fired power plant. I'm going to explain more about that in a few slides. You also might have heard about Shell Quest. That had its 10th anniversary of injection last week, and they're over 9.5 million tons under the ground in 10 years. Enhance, Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, so the pipeline in the Enhance project started in 2020 with 5 million tons stored, so 1 million tons a year. And then Glacier, Advantage/Entropy, they started injecting in 2022, and they've put away 250,000 tons according to their website, as far as I can tell. So you can see we've done millions of tons of this for over 25 years in Western Canada, and Canada is a world leader in this field. Now, my part of this, well, I actually was involved in writing the proposals for the Weyburn project in 1999. So I started doing this more than 26 years ago. That's a long time. We had our 25th anniversary of injection in October. And we ran that project for 13 years, and we published 2 books on the outcome of that. So in 2004, this monitoring storage project report, and you can find that online if you want to read more about the details of all that. We also published another book in 2012, which was a best practice manual for all the things you would do to monitor and verify and all you ever want to know about that. And that's available from the Petroleum Technology Research Center, so you can get that. I also helped Shell do their project, so their public hearings, as well as I was a technical reviewer for that project twice over a 2-year period. I've been involved in Aquastore since 2008, and I'm still involved. And in fact, I'm one of the technical leads that all the work that goes on there, we do. And I also maintain a lot of other work in Alberta and consulting and various things. So I've spent my career doing this on some of the largest projects in the world. Okay, so they asked me to answer some questions, give you guys some questions that you might have. And the first question is, how do we make sure that we know what the CO2 is doing? So how do we make it behave in the subsurface? We say we're going to inject it. How do we know that it stays down there, and how do we watch what it's doing? How do we make sure this is working? Well, all of these projects follow the sort of same cookbook, and that's something called an MMV plan, or Measurement, Monitoring, and Verification Plan. So this is a written document that basically lays out what you're going to do to make sure that when you put it down there, you can prove that it's staying down there, okay? So these MMV plans are now based on decades of learning and published research. And because of the work that we've done over the years, the group that I've been involved with and colleagues of mine have written two sort of documents that guide governments in doing this. And the first one's Canadian Standard Z741-12, and that's basically geological storage of carbon dioxide. So that's a Canadian standard document that essentially says you shall do this, you should do this, and maybe you might want to think about doing this. Okay, so shalls, coulds, shoulds, and woulds. Okay. Now there's also an international one too that's picked up, so around the world. All right. These MMV plans are developed, they're site specific. Okay, so what is of concern to a community in one location might not be a concern in another community, another location. So these are developed based on community consultation, based on these drilled wells.